The roadside motel was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a faded postcard from the 60s. Sun-bleached signs, peeling paint, and weeds creeping through the cracks in the asphalt parking lot. Danny and I had been driving for hours, and when we spotted the flickering vacancy sign in the distance, it felt like fate, or at least an opportunity to stretch our legs and satisfy our curiosity. The place was obviously abandoned, the windows dark and hollow, but the front door swung open with an eerie creak when we pushed it. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of dust and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. Most of the rooms we peeked into were exactly what you'd expect. Torn wallpaper, stained mattresses, broken furniture. But then we found room 106. The door was slightly ajar, and when we pushed it open, it was like stepping into a different world. The bed was neatly made with crisp, clean linens. A vase of wilted flowers sat on the nightstand next to a small leather-bound journal, and the faint smell of perfume lingered in the air, as though someone had just stepped out minutes before we arrived. Danny was the first to step inside, his sneakers silent against the pristine carpet. I hesitated at the threshold, my hand resting lightly on the doorknob. Everything about the room felt wrong. It was too perfect, too preserved, as if time had stopped here while the rest of the motel crumbled into decay. "Look at this," Danny said, holding up the leather-bound journal from the nightstand. The cover was smooth, barely worn, and the pages inside were filled with neat handwriting. June 14th, 1974. Checked into room 106. The smell of perfume lingers, and the lights flicker when I try to sleep. But it's the mirror. The mirror feels like it's watching me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as Danny read aloud. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, glancing around the room. The lamp on the nightstand flickered briefly, and I could have sworn I caught a faint shadow moving in the reflection of the mirror above the dresser. "Weird," Danny muttered, flipping through more pages. "It's like whoever wrote this knew something was wrong but stayed anyway." I turned toward the door, ready to leave this unsettling room behind, but the handle wouldn't budge. I jiggled it harder. "Locked. Danny? I think we have a problem." He looked up from the journal, his face pale under the flickering light. "What do you mean, locked?" "It wasn't locked when we came in." The overhead light buzzed loudly before cutting out completely, plunging the room into darkness. The darkness swallowed everything. The faint smell of perfume felt stronger now, cloying, as if it were being pushed into the room. My phone's flashlight sliced through the black, its thin beam illuminating Danny's wide eyes and the journal trembling in his hands. "Try the door again," he said, his voice tight. I grabbed the handle and twisted, pulled, even slammed my shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. It felt solid, immovable, like it was fused to the frame. Danny flipped to the last entry in the journal, his voice trembling as he read aloud. The lights flickered again. "The door won't open, and the mirror, it's moving. I can hear someone breathing behind me, but when I turn around, there's no one there. Please, if anyone finds this, don't stay in room 106. Get out. Get out now." We both froze. From somewhere inside the room, there was a sound, a faint creak, like weight shifting on the bed behind us. My flashlight swung toward the bed. The perfectly smooth linens were now rumpled, as if someone had just sat down. "Did you see that?" Danny whispered, backing toward the window. The mirror above the dresser let out a faint crack. A fine spiderweb fracture began to spread across the glass, slow and deliberate, like it was growing. And then I heard it, breathing, soft, shallow, and impossibly close. The breathing grew louder, raspy and uneven, like someone struggling to draw air through clenched teeth. Danny's flashlight trembled as he aimed it at the mirror. The crack had spread across its surface, spiderwebbing outward from an almost perfect handprint pressed into the glass, from inside the mirror. "Let's break the window," Danny hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned toward the window and grabbed the heavy bedside lamp, yanking its cord from the wall. With all the strength I could muster, I hurled it at the glass. The impact sent shards flying, but instead of falling away, the window rippled, like a stone dropped into water. The glass moved, distorting briefly before returning to its original state. "What the hell was that?" Danny said, stumbling back. The lamp clattered to the floor, the bulb shattering, and the perfume smell intensified, thick and suffocating. My eyes burned, and a metallic taste filled my mouth. In the mirror, the fractured handprint was gone. But now, a faint outline of a face began pressing forward, pushing against the glass as if trying to break through. "Look at the door!" Danny shouted. The journal was now lying open on the floor, its pages flipping rapidly despite the lack of wind. The door handle rattled violently, like someone or something was on the other side, trying to force its way in. A whisper filled the air, soft but clear, echoing in a voice that sounded layered, like two people speaking at once. "Stay with us." Danny grabbed my arm. "We have to do something." But before I could answer, the lights surged back on, bright, blinding, and steady. The door clicked, swinging open slowly as if it had never been locked. We didn't hesitate. Danny and I sprinted out of room 106, our feet pounding against the carpeted hallway as the door creaked shut behind us. We didn't stop running until we burst through the front doors of the motel and stumbled into the cold night air. The silence outside felt oppressive, heavy, as if the darkness itself was pressing down on us. Danny bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for breath while I scanned the empty parking lot, half expecting to see someone, or something, following us. "Did that just happen?" Danny stammered, his voice trembling. I couldn't answer. My hands were still shaking, and the faint smell of perfume clung to my clothes, to my skin, like it had seeped into me. The motel stood silently behind us, the faint glow of a few flickering bulbs casting pale yellow light against its peeling facade. "Let's go," I said finally, my voice tight. We scrambled back to the car, and as soon as the engine roared to life, I slammed on the gas, gravel spitting under the tires as we sped away from the cursed building. Neither of us spoke for a long time, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the faint whine of the cold wind outside. About 20 minutes down the road, Danny spoke up, his voice quiet. "The journal? Did you grab it?" I shook my head. In the chaos, it had been left behind on the floor of room 106. And somehow, I felt like that's exactly where it was supposed to stay. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for anything about that motel. Room 106, strange occurrences, accidents, but there was nothing, like it had been wiped from history, or worse, like no one had ever made it out to tell the story. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I catch it, the faintest trace of perfume in the air. And every time it makes me wonder, did we really escape that night, or did something follow us out? The mall stood like a monument to decay, massive, hollow, and draped in shadows. Its once bright signage was faded, the glass doors smeared with dust and streaked with old graffiti. I squeezed through a gap in one of the metal shutters, the faint crunch of broken glass underfoot echoing in the cavernous space. My flashlight cut a thin beam through the darkness, illuminating empty kiosks, shattered display cases, and faded posters still clinging to the walls. It had been nearly a decade since the mall closed. They said it was a structural issue, a cracked foundation, unstable support beams, but rumors told a different story. Stories about disappearances, shadows moving in the corners of security cameras, and strange sounds echoing in the dead of night. I told myself those were just urban legends, the kind that always cling to abandoned places like this. But as I moved deeper into the husk of the building, the silence became suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The deeper I went, the more the air felt wrong. Stale, heavy, almost suffocating. My flashlight beam wobbled slightly as I navigated around overturned benches and shattered tiles. Storefronts stared back at me with hollow, broken windows, like empty eye sockets. Some still had mannequins inside, their plastic faces staring blankly into the void. Then I noticed it, signs of life. A half-empty water bottle sat near an old food court table. A pile of crumpled fast food wrappers lay next to a tattered sleeping bag tucked into a corner. Someone had been here recently, Very recently. My stomach tightened as I scanned the shadows beyond my flashlight's reach. That's when I saw the writing. It was scrawled across one of the food court pillars in jagged, uneven handwriting. "Don't go downstairs." I swallowed hard. Downstairs. That would be the lower level, the service corridors and maintenance tunnels. The kind of places no one visits, even when the mall was still alive. I considered turning back, but curiosity, or maybe pride, kept me moving forward. Somewhere in the distance, a faint metallic clink echoed through the halls. I froze, every nerve in my body on edge. It wasn't just a random noise, it was deliberate. Someone was here. The sound lingered in the air, faint but sharp, like metal striking metal. My flashlight wobbled as I aimed it down the long corridor ahead. The shadows felt thicker now, pressing in from every corner. I forced my feet to move, stepping carefully over broken tiles and scattered debris. My breathing sounded too loud in the vast emptiness of the mall. As I approached the escalators leading to the lower level, I spotted more writing smeared across the glass railing in what looked like red paint or something worse. "They watch. They wait." My throat tightened as I scanned the area. The escalators were frozen in time, their metal steps coated in dust and grime, descending into pitch-black darkness below. My gut told me to turn around, to leave the way I'd come. But then I noticed it, footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, leading downstairs. Someone had gone down there recently, and if the warnings were true, they might not have come back up. Another noise, a faint shuffle, closer this time, snapped me out of my thoughts. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing across the corridor. For just a split second, I saw movement. A figure slipping out of sight behind an old clothing kiosk. My chest tightened. "Hello!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. It echoed back at me, hollow and unanswered. Every instinct told me to run, to leave this place behind. But my feet were rooted to the ground, my flashlight trembling as I kept scanning the area. Then I heard it again. Shuffling, deliberate, this time from behind me. I wasn't alone, and whoever or whatever was here didn't want me to leave. My chest felt tight, every breath shallow as I spun around, my flashlight beam trembling across cracked tiles and empty storefronts. The shuffle came again, closer this time, deliberate, like someone wanted me to know they were there. My gut screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. "Who's there?" I called out again, my voice barely rising above a whisper. No response. Just silence, the kind of heavy silence that feels alive, pressing against your skin. I backed away slowly, trying to retrace my steps toward the way I'd come in. That's when I noticed something on the ground, a crumpled piece of paper lying among the dust and debris. I knelt to pick it up, my flashlight illuminating jagged, frantic handwriting. "They're in the walls. Don't let them see you. Don't trust the lights." My flashlight flickered. Once, twice. Then it went out entirely. The darkness swallowed me whole, pressing against my eyes, my chest, my mind. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I smacked the flashlight against my palm, desperately trying to bring it back to life. It flared back on, and that's when I saw it just for a second. A face, pale, wide-eyed, staring at me from the other side of a cracked display window. It disappeared the moment the light hit it, vanishing into the shadows like smoke. I stumbled backward, the beam shaking as I pointed it wildly in every direction. Couldn't breathe. The shadows felt like they were closing in, alive and predatory. That's when I heard a voice, soft, raspy, impossibly close. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was so close I felt it against my skin, like icy breath brushing past my ear. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the cracked floor and empty kiosks, but there was nothing, just shadows stretching like claws across the walls. My legs finally obeyed me, and I started backing away, my steps quick and uneven. But then I heard it again, a faint shuffling sound, and something else, breathing, shallow, rasping, coming from somewhere just out of sight. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I caught movement at the edge of the beam. A figure slipping into an open service door marked staff only. I hesitated. The entrance I'd come through was behind me, somewhere far down the corridor. But whoever or whatever was out here was between me and that exit. The only other way was through that service door. My feet moved before my brain caught up, and I pushed through the rusted door, slipping into a narrow hallway. The air was colder here, the walls damp and stained with something dark. Old maintenance carts and broken light fixtures were scattered along the floor. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, buzzing like angry insects. That's when I saw them. More scribbled warnings scrawled across the walls. Don't look back. They see you when you stop moving. Get out. Get out. Get out. A metallic clink echoed ahead of me, followed by faint footsteps. My chest tightened. Someone or something was in this hallway with me. I kept moving, my flashlight darting left and right. The hallway twisted and turned like a maze, and I could feel the weight of eyes on me, hidden in the cracks and crevices of the decaying walls. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A door with faint light bleeding from beneath it. An exit, maybe even the exit. But before I could reach it, a silhouette stepped into the hallway ahead. A person, thin, gaunt, wearing clothes so tattered they looked like they'd been here for years. Their head tilted slightly to one side, and their lips pulled into a stretched, unnatural smile. "You shouldn't have come here," they whispered again, their voice crackling like static. The figure stood perfectly still, blocking the faint light spilling from beneath the exit door. Their head tilted slightly, their grin sharp and stretched like it had been carved into their face. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I raised it higher, illuminating their pale, almost translucent skin. Their eyes, wide, unblinking, and wrong, were fixed on me. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. "I don't want any trouble," I croaked out, my voice breaking. Their smile twitched wider, impossibly so, and then they took a single step forward. Their feet barely made a sound against the damp floor, as if they were gliding rather than walking. I turned and bolted. My flashlight beam danced wildly across the walls as I sprinted back the way I came. The air felt thicker, colder, like it was dragging against my body with every step. Behind me, I heard rapid footsteps, faster than should have been possible, pounding against the floor, closing the distance. I reached a corner, nearly slipping as I turned, and spotted another door, a rusted emergency exit sign hanging above it. Without hesitation, I slammed into it with my shoulder. The door creaked, groaned, and then gave way, sending me sprawling onto cracked concrete outside. The cold night air hit me like a shock, sharp and clean. I scrambled to my feet, my palms scraped and bleeding, and spun around to slam the door shut behind me. Through the narrow crack, I caught a glimpse of movement. A pale hand, long fingers clawing at the edge of the door, before I shoved it closed and heard the heavy clang of the latch locking into place. I stumbled backward, gasping for breath, staring at the now silent door. It was over. Whatever that was, it was still in there. The drive home was a blur. I didn't stop, didn't look back. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked every door, covered every window, and collapsed on the floor, trembling. I tried to find information about the mall the next day, news articles, Urban Explorer forums, anything. But all I found were vague mentions of unexplained disappearances and rumors about people who went inside and never came back. One post stood out, a blurry photo of graffiti scrawled on a wall deep inside the mall. It read, "Don't look back. They see you when you stop moving." And underneath it, in fresh ink, a single line, "One got out. One always gets out." I don't know who or what I encountered in that place, but I know one thing for certain. I'll never set foot in an abandoned building again. The factory loomed over me like a giant, rusted skeleton. Its towering smokestacks cut jagged silhouettes against the gray sky, and the faint smell of something chemical, something sharp, hung in the air. My dad had been bragging about acquiring the place for months, calling it his biggest business move yet. He'd flown off to a meeting in another city that morning, leaving me behind with a bored assistant who barely noticed when I slipped away with my camera. Inside, the silence was oppressive. My sneakers crunched against scattered debris and broken glass as I wandered deeper into the cavernous space. Rusted machinery sat frozen in time, their gears choked with dust and grime. Most of the rooms were empty, echoing my footsteps back at me in ghostly whispers. But then, tucked behind a half-collapsed wall, I found it. A heavy metal door slightly ajar, hidden in the shadows. It wasn't like the others. It was newer, reinforced, and locked with a keypad that someone had apparently forgotten to reset. With a glance over my shoulder, I pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The room beyond the metal door was unlike anything I'd seen in the factory so far. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off rows of unmarked barrels stacked against the walls. The air was thick, almost humid, with a sharp chemical smell that made my throat itch. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation onto the concrete floor, which was stained with dark, oily patches. In the corner, a table was cluttered with chemical equipment, glass flasks, tubes, and what looked like hastily scribbled notes on stained paper. Some of the barrels had faint markings on their lids, faded symbols that looked vaguely hazardous. I stepped closer to one, my fingers brushing against its cold metal surface. That's when I heard it, the faint echo of footsteps somewhere nearby, followed by the low murmur of voices. Panicked, I ducked behind one of the larger barrels, crouching low as the voices grew clearer. A man was talking, his voice sharp, impatient. "No, we can't wait any longer. The inspections are getting closer. If this leaks out, we're all done for." Another voice replied, quieter but firm. "We'll move the barrels tomorrow night. No mistakes this time." My stomach turned. Toxic waste. Illegal dumping. This wasn't just some forgotten corner of the factory. It was a secret operation, hidden behind corporate polish and my father's smooth speeches. The voices started to fade as the men moved toward the exit. I let out a shaky breath, my hand pressed against my chest to steady my racing heart. But then one of them stopped. "Wait, did you hear that?" I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The sound of boots scuffing against the concrete echoed through the chamber. From my hiding spot behind the barrel, I could see one of the men's shadows stretch across the floor, his silhouette pausing just feet away from me. "Probably just a rat," the other man said dismissively, but his voice carried an edge of doubt. "Check it anyway," the first one replied. The shadow shifted as the man stepped closer, and I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hand over my mouth to muffle any sound. My heartbeat pounded so loud in my ears that I was sure they could hear it. The man's boots crept forward, stopping right next to the barrel I was hiding behind. I could smell his cigarette smoke mixed with the sharp chemical tang in the air. After what felt like an eternity, he let out a frustrated grunt. "Nothing. Let's go before someone sees us." The men's footsteps faded, and then I heard the heavy metal door creak open and slam shut. I waited, counting to 30 in my head before daring to move. My legs felt weak as I pushed myself up, my knees trembling. My phone was in my pocket, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it as I turned on the camera app. I snapped a few quick photos of the barrels, the chemical equipment, and the stained floor. Evidence. I needed evidence. But as I turned toward the exit, something caught my eye. A small red light blinking faintly near the ceiling. A security camera. My stomach dropped. Someone was watching me. The tiny red light blinked steadily, a quiet reminder that my every move had been recorded. My stomach churned as I realized the men might not have been the only ones watching me. I needed to get out now. I crept back toward the metal door, every step careful and deliberate, my breath shallow as I strained to hear any noise beyond the walls. The chemical smell clung to my clothes, and my phone felt slick in my trembling hand. I slipped through the door and into the factory's main floor, but the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was suffocating. That's when I heard it. A faint echo, distant but unmistakable, footsteps. Not the slow, casual kind, but sharp, deliberate strides. They weren't coming from the same direction I'd come from. They were cutting me off. Someone else was here, and they knew I'd seen too much. I ducked behind a rusted piece of machinery, my chest heaving with shallow breaths. I couldn't stay hidden forever. they'd find me eventually. My eyes darted around, searching for an exit. The faint glow of daylight filtered through broken glass windows on the far side of the factory. It wasn't the main exit, but it was something. Summoning every ounce of courage, I bolted. My sneakers squealed against the dusty floor as I sprinted across the cavernous space. Behind me, the footsteps quickened, breaking into a run. Someone shouted, "Stop!" But I didn't look back. I reached the window, grabbing the rusted frame and hoisting myself up. Glass shards scraped against my arms as I squeezed through, landing hard on the gravel outside. My ankle twisted painfully, but I didn't stop. I limped toward the tree line bordering the factory grounds, my phone still clutched tightly in my hand. I didn't stop running until I was deep into the woods, far enough that the factory was just a silhouette in the distance. Only then did I allow myself to collapse against a tree, gasping for air. The police took my call seriously after I showed them the photos on my phone. They raided the factory days later, but by then, the barrels were gone, the equipment cleared out, and any evidence of illegal activity had been scrubbed clean. Whoever was behind it had resources and power. My father denied everything. He said I was mistaken, that I had let my imagination run wild in an old, abandoned building. But I know what I saw, and I know that someone out there was willing to do anything to keep it quiet. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they're still watching me, if that blinking red light ever stopped recording. And every time I get an unknown number calling my phone, I hesitate before answering, my stomach twisting with fear, because some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered.